This is Support is Sexy, episode 560, with attorney and author, Andie Kramer. Welcome to Support is Sexy. I'm your host, Elayne Fluker, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I bring you inspiring women entrepreneurs who share their wins and lessons to help you take your business to the next level. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Support is Sexy. I'm so happy to have you here. You know, it just would not be the same without you. And I am happy to share this episode with you today. I had a great conversation with author and attorney Andie Kramer. And Andie has been an attorney, I think she said, for 30-something years. So she's very experienced. And her area of expertise, or something that she's very passionate about, is gender bias and helping women navigate gender bias, especially in the workplace. Now, if you're listening to this in real time, this is a very timely episode with all that just went on recently. Well, this goes on always, right? But certainly recently with the Supreme Court appointment in the United States. I'm outside of the United States right now, but I certainly still know about it. So women facing gender bias for all different reasons is something that is very important for me to talk about, very important to Andie, and I'm very glad to share it with you all today. So some of the things that we cover and Andie talks about, and she's a wealth of information, so I'm glad you'll be able to find out more about her. But she talks about 3 techniques for dealing with bias, also the power of owning your space. She shared a term with me I don't think I'd ever heard before called benevolent bias and how it is seductively evil. Also self-limiting biases and how gender bias affects the ways we see ourselves and so much more. So great information in here. Sad that we have to still talk about it. Glad that I'm able to share this information with you from someone like Andie who has so much wisdom. So without further ado, Andie Kramer. So Andie, thank you so much for joining us for an episode of Support is Sexy. I'm excited to chat with you.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad to be here talking with you. Excellent.
So our first question, when did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
Well, when I was probably 12 or 13 years old, I decided that I wanted to be a lawyer. And so I think that was probably the start of it. I did have my parents only knew one lawyer, and they asked him if he would have lunch with me. And so I met with him for lunch, so excited about the mentoring and the support that I was going to get. And he spent the entire lunch telling me why I did not want to be a lawyer, why nobody liked lady lawyers, that lady lawyers were unlovable, that I would never have a family, I would never get married, I would never have friends, I would be lonely. Yes, that was the introduction to entrepreneurship that I got.
Now, did it make you more determined or did it sort of throw you a little bit?
Well, it definitely did not deter me at all. It really irritated me. I think it was sort of, I'll prove you wrong, sort of. But it was interesting because he really had picked on, touched in on, zeroed in on a problem that women professionals have today, which is that we're so trained to want to be liked. Mm-hmm. And to think that being liked is so important that, so he was really touching on something that still is a problem today. But I ignored him and I went forward and I became a lawyer.
Go ahead.
And I have a family and I have a beloved child, and so there.
Right. So there, exactly. So there, sir. So how old were you again when that happened?
Probably 12 or 13 years old.
Oh goodness, it's such an impressionable time too. Good for you. So what would you say your background was like and where you grew up? Obviously, you were a child that didn't give up easily, but what was a young Andie like?
Well, I I have a older sister and a younger brother, and my sister is 15 months older than I am, and so apparently that's kind of too close to be in age. And so when I was born, she didn't like me and would beat me unmercifully.
Oh, no.
And so my mother took me to, they used to call preschool nursery school. And my mom took me to nursery school. And the headmistress asked her what did she want her daughter to get out of nursery school. And my mother said, I want her to learn how to hit her sister. To which, of course, was just a shock to the
Right.
Nursery school person. But after the first week, I did learn how to defend myself. And so I was always a scrappy kid, but never really wanted to be the one who would start the trouble. And I think that's probably played itself out for most of my life.
Was there any sort of, and it might have been different at that time, but just, I know obviously your mom wanted to get you away from your sister or teach you how to fight back, but was there any kind of counseling or anything for your sister or talking to her about why she was so angry? Or do you think it was because she was the baby, then here you come?
I think that the only thing that I know is just that it's harder when the children are so close together, that the older one doesn't have a chance to develop their sense of who they are. Mm. I'm sure that they talked to her and talked to me. I don't really remember, but there was nothing formal about it. I think in those days it was just sort of suck it up and deal with it.
How is your relationship now?
We get along just fine.
She knows you'll hit her back.
Yeah, I think she knows that if she does try to slug me, I will slug her back. No.
Right. Oh
we did develop some boundaries.
That's so interesting. My sister is actually 17 years older than I am. And though she didn't hit me when I was younger, she was the baby for so long. And I feel like there's a different kind of relationship there. My dad is actually asked before, why don't you two have a close, we are not at odds or anything, but he always
sure.
asked, why don't you have a close relationship? And I said, she was out of the house by the time I came along. She was basically an adult and going. So it's so interesting, the sibling relationships, how they develop because of age, starting there, age difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Go ahead.
But I was going to say that she never hit you, and she probably never had a chance to bond with you the way she would if she'd lived in the house with you.
Right. I do think she probably would kill me for saying, or maybe she probably wouldn't care. I do think she had some resentment. That's why I mentioned about you being the baby, because she was the baby 17 years is a long time. She was the youngest. Yeah. And then here I come, this, old baby, as they call it. I'm
right.
Came along, like, where did she come from? And my parents.
Where did she come from? And it's also probably an embarrassment for a 17-year-old to say you have
your parents. Yeah, baby. Exactly. A baby who can. Oh well, we made it through.
Yes, absolutely. That's terrific.
Now, would you say, I know you had long aspirations of becoming a lawyer, but what about entrepreneurship? Did you also, or do you see law as being an entrepreneur?
Well, I think that when I was graduating from law school, I had two different job offers that I was most interested in. One was to a huge law firm, international law firm, and the other was to a little tiny firm that had 5-6 lawyers when I interviewed with them, and probably 7 when I joined it. And so I decided to go with the little firm, which I think tells you something about an interest in entrepreneurship. And they did not have a tax department, and I was going to be a tax lawyer. And so what happened is they said, we'll give you all the training you want. We'll send you wherever you want to learn whatever you need to. So I think I viewed the practice of law as being an entrepreneur from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are specialized in gender bias. I know is an area that you, if not specialize in, definitely speak about and are an advocate for equality between gender. But what made you decide to focus on that area?
Well, when I was in law school, I was one of the first classes where because of Title IX, they actually had women admitted into law school.
And what school did you go to?
I went to Northwestern in Chicago.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so there were about 30% of my class was women. And so when I started law school, I thought that the world was going to be wide open for women. And when I started to practice and I went to that small firm, they couldn't have cared if a lawyer was purple polka dotted. If you did a good job, everybody wanted you on their projects. And so I didn't really experience gender bias until I left that firm and went to a very big law firm. And at the big law firm, people don't know you. Mm-hmm. And so they have all of the stereotypes about who you are based on how old you are or what color your skin is or whether you're a boy or a girl, those sorts of issues. And so what I found was that these people were had assumptions about me that had absolutely nothing to do with who I was. For example, I had my own clients, and so I joined as a full partner, corner office, and the reaction was, well, if she has her own clients in a corner office, then she obviously has to be a nasty person. Mm-hmm. And so the expectation was that you couldn't be, if you were competent, you couldn't be nice, and if you were nice, then obviously you weren't very competent. Right. And so that's where I started to realize that there was a problem and that there was something that needed to be done. And then a couple of years later, I was served on my law firm's management committee. And as part of that, I then served on our compensation committee. And what I found was that the women who would write their self-evaluations would talk about the team that they were working with, and I was on this team, and so-and-so and so-and-so were on the team. And the men would write self-evaluations about how they were total rock stars. Mm-hmm. And how they really had saved the client $1 gazillion. And, who do you think is going to make more money? Right, the men. Exactly. And so what happened is that was my foray into my avocation of trying to help professional women and women in the workplace to go as far and as fast as they want to their careers. And so that was the turning point for me.
I love that you mentioned that too. Something I never thought of. Obviously, we think of gender bias, people, quote unquote, and I know we'll talk more about this, but holding us back based on gender. But the fact that you mentioned an example of how it affects the way we even evaluate ourselves. So Absolutely. Even if we had the same opportunity to write a review about ourselves and, show us up as rock stars, as you said, it may make some women downplay their own contribution.
They do, and the studies prove that. And my own experience in reviewing and some now editing and providing comments on thousands of self-evaluations. What I can tell you is that women, we buy into the same stereotypes and biases that men have about women. And so women hold these same stereotypes about other women and hold these stereotypes about themselves. And so my husband and I, in our book, Breaking Through Bias, Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work, do spend some time talking about what we call self-limiting biases, which are the reasons that women don't raise their hand, don't volunteer, don't offer to take on those tough projects because we're somehow been trained, socialized, whatever, to think that somehow we're not good enough.
And is that what it is? I was going to ask, why do we buy into it too? If we know there has to be a part of us that knows that it's wrong, but why do you find that many women still operate that way or accept those stereotypes?
Well, we grow up with being socialized. And so by the time a girl is 3 or 4 years old, and a boy is 3 or 4 years old, that's when these stereotypes start to get sort of hardwired as habits. They're not, they're fixable. They're not concrete, but they get harder to fix, basically. And by the time a girl's 3, 4 years old, if I said to you, hey, let's go out and play ball, what you might say to me is, who does she think she is? You might say, I'm bossy. And so then what does a girl do when you're playing with me and you think I'm bossy? Well, I'm not going to invite you to my birthday party. So by the time we're 6, 7, 8 years old, we're trained to know that we're supposed to be nice and kind and sweet, and we're not supposed to be bossy. Yet a boy who says, let's go outside and play, well, he's a leader.
Right. So we read those messages, even as in your example, from kids to other kids.
Right. Absolutely. And then the parents could go ahead.
I was just going to say, then it's reinforced by people like the gentleman that you sat down with, who's saying to you as a 12-year-old girl, this is what girls do, this is what boys do, or, girls can't be lawyers.
Exactly. And the media tells us that all the time. There's very few movies where we're going to see women in positions of power, women of color in positions of power. And so the movies will also show how, as women get older, how by the time we're 30, 40 years old, then, we're too old to be the love interest of a 65-year-old man in the movies. Right. They only want a 20-year-old. Right. And if they have movies about women as we get older, then what the movies are about are typically that the woman gets dumber and and more confused and discombobulated in a way that men get smarter and age nicely, and women just sort of fall apart.
Fade away.
So, right. And so the media does all of us a disservice by showing women in those lights.
Which is why it's so important to have representation in media, so it shows people of different ages and backgrounds and all those things and experiences that can say, actually, no, it doesn't happen like that.
Absolutely. So that would be another way of overcoming the self-limiting biases.
Now, in your book, Breaking Through Bias, that you co-wrote with your husband, why was it important to have both perspectives, yours and his, or a woman and a man's, in the book?
Well, there were a number of reasons. First of all, we've collaborated on projects for decades, and so I knew that if I was going to write a book, I really wanted to get his participation in it. But in thinking about what we found is that very often this bias is viewed as gender bias is viewed as a woman's issue. And that's just wrong, because what happens is, as women, we'll talk about this to ourselves and to each other all the time, and nothing changes. Well, nothing's going to change until men and the organizations that they run are going to change. And they're not going to change unless they believe in and understand the problems that we face as women in the workplace. And so having my husband do it with me, having both a man's and a woman's perspective, really allowed us to show that, first of all, there is a man who gets it, which surprises a lot of women, actually. And second, that it is an issue that's important enough for a senior man to be spending his time talking about. And so it really does accomplish those benefits, frankly.
Now, how do we recognize bias in the workplace, or even for the women who are listening, who are mostly entrepreneurs, even in business dealings? How do we know when this is a circumstance where bias is involved?
Well, there's different types of bias that women entrepreneurs and women in business need to be very aware of. And so one of the things that we did in our book is we started, the beginning of it is really just setting out what the stereotypes are. And the biases are what reactions people have based on the stereotypes that they've got. And so we started with, if you identify what the stereotypes are and the biases that flow from them, then you have information that becomes powerful. And so what entrepreneurs and women in business can do is we can understand how somebody's reaction to us may be based on something totally different from what we're trying to communicate to them. And so one of the biases that women tend not to be as aware of as they should, if somebody's a blatant sexist pig, we're going to figure that out pretty much right away.
Right.
But if they act like they're really, gosh, you're so great and you're doing such a good job and all of this stuff, but they're not promoting us, or they're not giving us the important projects that we need, or they're not buying the goods that we're offering to sell them. Just talking a good game about how impressed they are with how talented we are, and yet they're not giving us the opportunities that we should get. That's a kind of bias too, and we refer to that as benevolent bias, which is
benevolent
bias, which is putting us up on a little pedestal, like, oh, she's really smart.
I was going to say that she's so smart, like people being astonished that you're so smart, but like you said, not making the deal with you, or astonished by the work that you've done, but still not moving.
Exactly. And that's the most seductively evil, because what happens is you get lulled into a sense of, well, they really like me and I'm really doing well. And so you don't get pushed. You don't get to move to the next level. And so
maybe does it stop you too from pushing as a, pushing for your raise or pushing for whatever you want?
Absolutely. It does. And so that's the one I would point. Yeah. And that's the one that I would point out is the most tricky.
So what would you say are 3 techniques that you recommend, either now or in your book, for dealing with bias when we're confronted with it?
Okay. Well, the first thing is information is power. So you want to understand it. The next one is that you need to know yourself well enough that you can address and deal with bias when you face it. Because one way is to just say, you're a biased person, I'm not going to talk to you. But of course, in business and in our careers, that's not going to get us very far. So the first is the information being powerful. The next is knowing ourselves. And then the third, which is what we spend most of the time in our book talking about, which is ways in which we can communicate with people, whether it's in writing, whether it's verbal, speaking to them, whether it's just body language and nonverbal. What we want to do is we want to communicate with people so that we can tell them that we are competent and confident and we are going to do a good job, but at the same time not setting off the alarm bells that would freak them out. So, for example, if you walked into a room and you said, okay, there's 5 of you here, you do this and you do that, and the other number 3 do this, number 4 do this, number 5 do this, and we're going to meet in half an hour and see where we're at. If you're a woman and you do that, everybody's hair catches fire. Who does she think she is bossing me around? But if you're a guy and you do that, everybody's like, okay, yes, because they expect it. So as women, one of the biases we have to deal with is that we have to be careful that we're not perceived as too tough, too hard, too masculine, because then people want to squash us because we're out of the stereotype pool of characteristics and behaviors that they like. And if we're too nice and kind and sweet, then they're happy to have us around, but they're not going to give us an important project. They're not going to give us a big sale. What they're going to do is they'll put us on the library committee or ask us to get lunch.
Right. I was going to say, it's like the too masculine side and then the other side of not necessarily too feminine, but like you said, these other things that are the quote unquote softer projects or, the softball, the soft pitch kind of thing. So do we then have to learn how to straddle the line, or what do you suggest in those circumstances?
Well, it turns out that the studies, and there's a lot of studies on this, the studies show that women who can manage and demonstrate behaviors that are both behaviors that are strong and independent and get the job done, as well as the nice and kind behaviors. If you can balance those two as a woman, we're actually going to get further along. Some of the studies show that we're going to make more money. We're going to get more promotions than all of the other women and all of the men.
If you have that mix of both.
Exactly. And so we call that the Goldilocks dilemma. And on our website, we have our blogs, and there's a blog about Goldilocks on our website as well. So that's another place, another resource to think about.
Okay, I'll make sure I link to that. So being the Goldilocks dilemma is getting it just right.
Exactly.
Okay. So would you say that you, at this point, you've been a lawyer for how many years?
This is my 40th year as a lawyer.
Yes, I love it, Andie. Your 40th year, and you've been at your firm, a partner at your firm for...
since I joined about 28 years ago. And then before that, I was at that little firm.
Right. So would you say in all this time at this point that you still, even if not in your firm, but in your career or otherwise, deal with gender bias?
Oh, absolutely. Every day.
Every day. So
Absolutely.
Is it then, knowing that, for all of us knowing now how long you've been in the business, would you say that it's something that we just have to accept isn't the right word, but just know that it's going to be present and then know the techniques for dealing with it?
Exactly. Because by suggesting that there are techniques that women can use to communicate in a way that would allow them to overcome bias, that doesn't mean that men are off the hook or organizations are off the hook. Organizations need to change, and the men who run them need to change. But if we waited for the men and the organizations to get it right, you and I will be long out of the workplace. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. And so these are things that we can do today to make sure that we get a chance at the careers that we desire, whether it's as an entrepreneur, whether it's as a professional, or whether it's somebody who's working on the line in a factory.
Now, I read that you believe for us to be able to, in some ways, sort of work around the bias, as we just talked about, that there's still a way, or not necessarily work around it or work with it, but there's a way for us to still accomplish our goals within that. So how do we do that so we're not necessarily maybe confronting it head on, but maybe, I don't know if we're leveraging it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll give you an example. If women very often, if women go into a meeting and we'll sit down at a table, and a man will come in and he'll take up a chair and he'll put on the chair next to him, he'll put his coat or he'll put his briefcase. And so women, because we tend to be accommodating, when more people come into the room, we make more room for them. We squish ourselves together. The guy doesn't move his coat or his briefcase. It's as if he doesn't even see that people are moving around. So what happens is space is power. And so one of the things what women can do is we can walk into a meeting or walk into a place where we're going to be talking, throw your shoulders back, sit tall, don't sit hunched over, don't scrunch yourself up. And you're going to project power to people. So if you're talking to somebody and you can tell that they're not paying attention to what you want them to. They're focused on something else, or you can tell that they're either, who does she think she is? That kind of stuff. Then what we could do is we could step back in our minds and say, what can we do better? Not how can I do something that's going to play into a bias necessarily or object to it, but I have a job to do. I'm trying to sell 1,000 units of something, or I'm trying to get somebody to buy my product. And if they're not, doesn't look like they're paying attention, doesn't look like they're hearing me as to why they should, then I'm going to step back and say to myself, I know what my objective is. I want to get this accomplished. What can I do? And sometimes that means that women can do things like use the word like, use phrases or language that isn't strong and sharp, that allows people to feel more comfortable, that we're not as threatening to them. And again, the studies show that if you have to do something like that to play into a bias, that one of the things is to still project confidence and competence in your nonverbal, in your body language. And even when you're on the phone or you're talking to somebody over Skype or Zoom or whatever, a lot matters on your posture. Whether you're sitting with your shoulders back or whether you are hunched over, it comes across in the way you're going to project and present yourself.
And you're so right about space as power, just how we show up and owning our own space, whatever that space looks like, right? So, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with you.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And that's something that I think I have been more aware of with traveling to different countries right now, and being as a Black woman in some countries where there are very few Black people, just walking on the street and being much more aware of having to own my own space.
Exactly.
Be comfortable in my own shoes, and not necessarily having thought about that as much before, being very clear in situations where I had to think about it. Whereas now it's sort of, now to go out on the street, you have to own your space. Like you said, your shoulders back. And I know it's very different than a gender bias, but it still is
No, it's the same concept. Well, first of all, as a Black woman, you have gender bias, but then you also have, racial biases and the stereotypes that go along with that.
Exactly.
So they mush together, and they don't just sort of layer on top of each other that you could peel one off. So it becomes, your identity becomes based on multiple different sorts of stereotypes.
So is it like women are constantly making decisions, in the sort of real-time decisions in the moment of how they're going to show up, how to own their space, navigating when to push, when to pull back, and that kind of thing throughout in your career or business dealings? Is that something we need to
Absolutely. Exactly. Mm-hmm. We have to accept it. Men do it all the time. They do it naturally.
Yeah, they don't seem conscious of it.
They don't, but they do it naturally, not because it's hardwired natural, but by the time they're 4 or 5 years old, they know that if they want to get invited to play on the t-ball or the softball team, they have to be nice to the leader, to the team captain, even if they think he's an idiot.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so they learn the politics that's involved. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that hurts women is there's a lot. If you Googled authenticity, you would come up with, probably thousands of articles about how women need to be authentic and our true selves. And it turns out that the reality is that that's another stereotype and a bias that holds us back. Because the reality is that we have all of these characteristics and behaviors of being nice and kind and sweet, or being strong and independent and tough and going to get the job done. And so in many ways, I think that holds women back, because it's basically tells them that somehow whatever way you thought you were going to be is the way you're stuck with. When in reality, our attitudes and the way we behave is really like walking to our closet in the morning and saying, I'm going to be going to an important meeting. What am I going to wear today? Or I'm going to the beach. What am I going to wear today? Or I'm going to a black tie dinner. What am I going to wear today? Mm-hmm. And we have all of these different, clothes in our closets. We have all of these different behaviors. And so we can dial them up or dial them down, depending on whether the response we're getting is not the response that we want.
That's why I mentioned different parts of you have to come forward at different times. It's not like you're being inauthentic, just as you said, or having to worry about being authentic. It's different parts of you have to show up for different situations.
Exactly. And so for women to be told that, authenticity means everything is just another way to hold us back, because then people can say, well, I don't want somebody like that on my project, or I don't want somebody like that to sell me that product or whatever.
So if there were one thing that you could say to encourage a woman who might be listening to this podcast, who might be struggling with or confronting bias in her workplace or in her business dealings, what would be one lesson you want to make sure she gets from this conversation?
I would like to tell her that perfection is overrated and being liked is overrated. And what I mean by that is that women tend to want to be liked, and we sacrifice some of our own competence and confidence when we struggle so hard to be liked. So I think being liked is overrated, but also perfection is overrated. If a lot of women will struggle to be perfect, and because of that, they won't raise their hands for new responsibilities or new opportunities. They won't take the move to become an entrepreneur. And so women hold ourselves back because we are concerned about being perfect. Mm-hmm. And so I would say both of those are overrated, and we can really have a full and exciting life if we cut ourselves some slack and told us that we don't have to be perfect and we don't have to be the most likable person on the block.
So in closing, Andie, if you think over your life and career and you had the chance to thank only one person whose support was critical to you personally or professionally, who would that be and what would you say?
If I could only thank one person, I think I would thank my husband. And I would do that because he's always been there for me in my career and rooting for me and supporting me and assuring me that it was going to be all right. And when our daughter was little, he would make a point of making sure that she knew what her mother was up to and the great things that her mother was doing, which made it clear to our daughter that having a career and being ambitious is something that is appropriate and acceptable. And so I would think that that's really it. And if I had one thing to say to him, it would be thank you.
Beautiful. I love it. Now tell us how we can support you. Tell everyone your website and where we can get your book. I'll make sure I have links to everything, but just so everybody can hear it.
Okay. All right. Well, our website is andieandal.com, and I'll spell it for you because my name is Andrea, but nobody calls me that. And my nickname has been spelled Andie. And so our website is Andie and andal.com. And we have our blogs listed there. We have a 10-question assessment about how do you handle gender biased situations, and it's confidential, and it'll send back an analysis about how you did on that. Our book is called Breaking Through Bias: Communication Techniques for Women to Succeed at Work. Mm-hmm. And we have the Goldilocks Dilemma blog, which would be great to link to that. Mm-hmm. And what we would like from the women who are listening to Support is Sexy, we'd love for you to join the conversation about bias with us. We're working on a new book, a second book, which is due at the publisher January 2nd.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And it's about women versus women at work, workplace conflict, and the bias that built it. And
Nice.
so if anybody wants to share with us ideas or thoughts or issues that they've experienced in their lives with other women, we would love to hear about that as well.
And you're writing this together with your husband
Yes,
as well?
we are. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I love the partnership of writing the books together. It's such a great idea.
Well, we certainly enjoy it. We've only had one 12-hour period where we weren't talking to each other about something. But other than that, we've been able to do just fine. So we've loved it.
And you also speak as well, right? As
Yes.
coaching and mentoring other women in business and career in dealing with bias.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so we probably speak at least once or twice a week and do workshops on both for women and for men to try to get more men involved in the conversation. So at trade associations, at companies and small groups, big groups, we travel around the country and try to make a difference.
Excellent. Well, Andie, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I honestly learned a lot. Can't wait to link to all this information, but just benevolent bias is a new one for me. I hadn't heard that. Very interesting. Got to be aware of that.
Keep your eyes open. You'll be surprised.
Yeah, now I'm aware of it. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, right. Before you go, what's a parting piece of advice from you to our listeners about anything?
Have a sense of humor is the last piece. We can get, especially in bias situations, we can get really pissed off. And what I would suggest is that we don't have to be a stand-up comic, but if you can see the outrageousness of somebody's behavior, if you can see how crazy or offensive somebody is, instead of just telling them that they're crazy and offensive, in some situations, just knowing that can make you smile, an acknowledgement that these people are really stupid. What happens is it gives you resilience to go forward. And so having a coping sense of humor is very valuable. And we do talk about that in our book as well. And it's something that you can learn to be stronger at without, it doesn't require anything that you were born with. You can work at it. And as an example, when I get stuck at the airport for 6 or 8 hours when my flights are delayed, I have comedy routines that I've got on my phone or on my iPod, and I can listen to short little things about people telling goofy stories, and it takes some of the pressure off of it.
That's a smart idea. I'm going to do that. Download some comedy things just to have them there for a quick laugh.
And they're short. You can put up with a lot of flight delays if you've got something kind of to listen to.
Excellent. Andie, thank you so much. Hold on just a moment.
Sure.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Andie and that you got a lot of information out of it. But there's more. To find out more, make sure you go to supportissexy.com. Go to that search icon and just search Andie, Andie. Her show notes page will pop up with links, resources, and all the ways to get in touch with her. Supportissexy.com and just search Andie. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you know I appreciate you. Until we chat again, always remember, support is sexy, and having it all doesn't mean doing it all alone. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.